inside the Parisi Palace, high above 3773 East Broadway. This is the Jake Feinberg Show, comedy on Power Talk. Thanks so much for making us part of your day today. And big day ahead with 3 interviews. And I get to start with a dear friend of the program and somebody who, like a lot of us, is sort of just trying to balance between the path of the spirit and also trying to weave around, I think, what seems to be just an incredibly interesting time in our cultural heritage, in the sense that there is this, I worry a little bit about the fact that people get a little too caught up in their own ego or their own interest, or their own needs, and as a result, oftentimes they infringe upon other people's craft, profession, ability to elicit truth. I really have a very, I don't know, I guess the point is, my ego is still deeply invested in what I do, and when I do quality work and there's nothing dubious going on, when it comes back around and somebody has a problem with it after over a year, it puzzles me that they ask me to compromise my own artistic integrity. And as a result, it leaves me in a little bit of a mental dilemma. But suffice it to say, I call upon one of my spirit teachers today. She is just a wonderful cat, incredibly bright, and probably deals with some stuff similar to this. Kaya Midland, welcome back to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thanks for having me, Jake. It's nice to be with you.
Yeah, can I talk to you a little bit about this fine line? I know we talked a little bit about it last time, but I just, without mentioning names, I transcribed an interview I did with somebody last year regarding their best friend who took his own life, and it was a heartfelt comment. And I put it up last year, got a lot of traction on new media. It was, just the truth. It was what is true. And I found it on my timeline, the memories on Facebook, and I reposted it, and I'm sure it's getting some attention because it's a really good quote coming from a very credible source. And this person has always been good to me, but has never done me any favors. And actually, in fact, in any event, I just got literally 5 minutes before I came on with you, I get this message from him saying, Jake, can you please take down that quote? I know I said it on the interview, but I don't want so-and-so to get pissed at me. And this is like a big rock star. And it's like, immediately I recognize how much my ego is invested in the work that I do, because I know that, in a couple days or even less than that, it's not going to mean a whole lot of anything. I'm going to say, why didn't I just take it down? But part of me is just like, well, you didn't have a problem last year. And I feel like you're talking down to me as if you're worried about somebody else's feelings when you told the truth, and there's nothing inflammatory. Listen, if something's false, I'll take it down. If something is defamatory, defaming somebody, of course, I don't even deal with that kind of stuff. But you didn't have a problem with it last year when it went public. And now that it's being put up again, and you're going to ask me to take it down because you don't want to ruffle the feathers of some, freaking, dude that's, it's not the first time it's happened, but it sort of just strikes at this idea of, who do you think you are? Like, this is like, it is what it is. Like, I don't know what else to say. And I just wonder how you've learned to deal with your ego when somebody challenges your craft, your gifts, your ability to extract stuff. It happens sometimes with people on the radio when they are like, oh my God, I can't believe how much I revealed on that radio interview. And I just am very firm with them. And I'm just like, this is, anyway, can you talk, I just think it's instructive, not only for me, but for other people to, learn how other people deal when you feel challenged with the things that you are that you've been gifted with and that you're trying to do in a very honest and truthful way, and how you learn to deal with those emotions.
Right. Yeah. First of all, I'm sorry that, that happened.
I'm sorry it happened like 5 minutes before we talked,
Yeah, well, that's how it goes. That's life, and that's what's coming up. That's what's blooming in the moment. So that's all good. It's a growth process for everyone. But I mean, it's obviously agitating and painful on both sides. And I would say, there's a lot here. First of all, sometimes we do make mistakes and missteps in our work, in our public, statements and so on. So certainly we may change our viewpoint or our perspective or what we feel comfortable sharing over time. And we may, all of us look back probably at things that we've said in the past in a new light and kind of have regrets that we said things a particular way, or we wouldn't say it the same way now, from the perspective of your friend who reached out to you and said, can you take that down? We can all understand looking back on things that we have said in the past and feeling a little cringe or discomfort, or like we would say it differently now. And at the same time, when something's done publicly, and published, we don't have any control over how it's out there anymore. We have to just let it go. And then you could make a new statement and say, well, here's what I would say now, right? That's for him. For you, and for all of us who are, sharing things that we think are of value and then maybe feel pressed upon by outer sources that, are not comfortable with it, we really have to look at, which is what you're doing. Is what I put out there in accord with truth? Is it dharmic? Is it helpful and beneficial to someone who might access it, right? And if so, then maybe I stand by sharing it. Is it harming? Is it in discord? Then maybe I take it down and I don't share it. But I do think that right now we are in this really intense time. We're all experiencing it together.
Yes.
Which is fear of offending people, fear of being canceled, fear of saying the wrong thing and then being forever judged or categorized negatively because of that one thing, because we're watching it happen to other people. And I can say for myself, I have had to, in some ways, drastically almost change the way in which I teach and speak in the last 2 years, more than in the prior 18 years of teaching, because of that cultural pressure now around offending people. And frankly, what I've noticed is that people get offended or afraid on behalf of other imagined parties.
You're
right?
nailing
words,
this. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Your friend is not, the person who said this quote themselves may not have a problem with what they said.
Exactly.
But they have an imagined party who might be hurt, bothered, disgruntled, offended, whatever it is. And I've seen that in my work when I'm presenting something as was presented to me by my teachers and by traditional texts of the yoga tradition and so on. And there will be a handful of people that are the loudest people in the room sometimes, the squeakiest wheel, so to speak. So they don't necessarily represent the vast majority of people, but they certainly are the squeakiest. And they are, a friend of mine called it the hobby of being offended. They are ready to fight to protect imagined people that might someday be offended by what's being said. And it really blocks growth, learning, and it honestly blocks connection, which is ironic because I think when we are afraid of offending others, it's coming from a place of wanting to be connected to others, right? Because I feel if I offend someone, then I will keep them at a distance. And so I don't want to offend anyone because I want to remain connected to people. And yet the fear of offending people itself holds people at a distance. That's my experience.
I mean, So, so why do you believe? I mean, you know, everything's kind of turned upside down because of the insanity and the dissidence, or the cognitive dissidence over the last 4 years. But this, why do you feel that there is this? I can. It's so heavy right now. It's weird. Like I can feel. And putting this aside, because I've dealt with this before, but I mean, I have my own manifestations of my own anxiety and ego that crop up. But I mean, why is it? I mean, why is it so? Why have we begun to take ourselves so seriously that we can't even? That we are worried about offending people, a third party, a phantom party. Like, why? My older daughter and I were, we actually have been enjoying watching. Don't take this the wrong way, because we watch a lot of Fox News now, because it's kind of there's a lot of comedy there, and
Sure.
and they had this whole segment on Dr. Seuss last night, and they're banning a certain book, because of the depictions of Orientals and dark skinned people as subhuman, or and these are all like and that's just one example. You have all this pressure to conform to something that, well, it's offensive. I don't know who makes those judgment calls, but even someone like you has had to tailor their language to not offend people. And for me, it's like I look at it. Part of me, it doesn't try to go so macro. It just sort of looks at it and says, like, if he had come to me and said, "Hey man, I am really in a dark spot right now, and I feel hard. I'm missing Neil a lot, and I miss my, and it just sort of rehashed a lot of really hard things. Do you think you could take it down?" I would be more receptive to that, But the idea that it went, and I just wonder why you think. I don't know if there's really any one right answer, but why are we in this pressure cooker of conformity towards politeness, or you hear people throw out all these different terms, but the floor is yours. I mean, why do you believe we are, and is it because of all these sort of the extreme things that have gone on for years, sort of the repression of women, or civil rights, or, and this is sort of like the only way to sort of check that is by being completely politically correct. I'd love to hear your take on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I have an answer as to why, but off the top, I mean, I think one thing is it's sort of become a snowball effect where we're almost become culturally addicted to these storylines about who said the wrong thing, who got offended. It's become, actually, we could talk about the root of it and some ideas about what that might be. I think it's multifaceted for sure, but I also think now it's become an addiction that we just love to hear about who got offended and why, who's the most offended in the room, and actually we are uplifting and shining a spotlight on whoever is the most recently, most intensely offended. And that gets the attention.
Right.
And then I think what happens, because we're also an attention-seeking culture right now, particularly because of the emphasis of social media and influencership and reality TV, all those things converging, I think also make us, due to insecurity and a feeling of lack, we seek attention. And so then I think people who are not offended or have no reason to be offended, right, are not oppressed in any particular real way, will generate being offended, generate an identity of oppression in order to get some attention for that. So, for example, my husband has a client who's a Vedic astrologer, as we talked about in our last chat. he is a client who is an African American professor, an elder, established in his field, well-respected at a well-respected university. And you would imagine that this is a man that we would want to kind of uplift and have in a university, right? Having an influence on young people.
Sure.
In the field of the arts, African-American man, somewhat, kind of alternative, that kind of thing. And he retired early because it was impossible. It became impossible for him to teach because students were constantly feeling offended and their parents would come in and complain, you hurt my baby's feelings. How could you have, said this about their work and not given them an A++++, and my baby deserves this. And so these are privileged, the students are mostly privileged, white, upper class kids. They are not, suffering. They're not the suffering party in a system of repression, right? But it's like we get attention when we feel that we are the one suffering, when we're being impinged upon, when we are, a victim. And so I think there are underlying reasons, but I also think whatever the underlying reasons are, it's also had this snowball effect where the loudest, saddest victim in the room gets the most attention. And so we're kind of obsessed with who's feeling most victimized. And hey, if I want attention, I need to put myself in that position or have an identity of victimhood so that I too can be offended.
Well, okay, so this is, I don't want to, this is really not about me, but, can I ask you about?
It's all about me, right? Everything.
No, because, it's like, okay, so whatever. I try to do something a little bit different on New Media in the sense that, like, I don't want it to be me in front of the camera. I don't want to I want to promote other people, what they're trying to say, messages within that. People can take away what they want from it. But, it's just like all this tangential. And like you said, this is the snowball effect. I wanted you to talk to, I think, like, for instance, this professor that your husband is a client, is it hard? Do you believe the entitlement or the brainwashing, for that matter, that's gone on in our education system and goes back generations, is that when they hear something that's actually true but is so foreign to them, or something that the dogma that they were raised with is so antithetical to that truth that therefore they become completely offended by truth? I think that it's
yes.
Right? It's like,
yeah.
I know when I screw up. Like if I took your words, I don't want to say out of context, but if I just slandered, I would know that I screwed up. Like I have to take it down. But when it's the truth and you've just been, that's the point, is like, are you going to investigate that objectively, or are you just a sheep that has been completely brainwashed? And I can't necessarily blame, I know it's happening at universities because I've interviewed a lot of jazz professors, people that have worked on, like, racial tolerance, and it still goes on. I've talked to healers that grew up in the Midwest, and, you drive through the black part of town in Iowa somewhere, some city, and they'd say, lock the doors, roll up the windows. Anyway, dogma creates some sort of, not entitlement, but there's a certain truth. But when the actual reality is presented, then people are offended. Can you riff on that?
Yeah, this is actually what I was thinking. What I was going to say is what I view as maybe the seed of this problem that we're talking about is that we don't have, particularly in modern westernized culture, where nothing is sacred, or what we hold as sacred isn't really what is sacred, right?
Exactly.
That we have lost an ability to uphold truth with a capital T as fundamental and primary and of the highest value. And what we've done is we've replaced the objective truth with a capital T with a subjective my truth, which is based on my feelings, my likes and dislikes, my preferences, my self-concern, and my self-interest. And so let's imagine your mind as, a building, and that building is constructed with conditioning, projection, self-concern, self-interest, all my likes and dislikes, my identity, what we would call ego, right? That's what's constructed the building. And then some truth comes along with a capital T that threatens that structure, right? We don't like that. And so we will do whatever it takes to hold up that structure rather than let it be deconstructed by something that is actually true with a capital T and ultimately better for us, more beneficial to us. We are trading in the T with the, truth with the capital T because it's uncomfortable and because it doesn't match the current construct. We reject it and we fight. We actually are fighting for our egoic little likes and dislikes that have been constructed, through childhood and maybe before that karmically and so on for the time of our life. And the stronger we hold on to those constructs, right, the more fiercely we reject anything that's actually true with a capital T, that's objective. That's what
how like in your own cultivation, like how have you learned to was there ever a point in your time when in your life when you were dealing with lowercase t's and a T with a capital T came along and it made you uncomfortable, but you actually went inside, felt that uncomfortability, and investigated what that capital T was really all about? Because that's it's denialism. If otherwise, you don't want to really look at it. You don't want to look in the mirror. You just want to keep staying in that bubble. Did you have your own sort of road to Damascus as it relates to the capital T?
I mean, I feel like that is the entire life of spiritual growth. I'm not even sure I can think of, I don't know that I can think of one dramatic, I mean, it's also the life of a great relationship. Like my husband and I actually just celebrated 20 years together. And I would say, even just looking at a relationship, which is part of a life of personal growth, if not spiritual growth, for those who are spiritual seekers, it's both, right?
Right.
That what happens in a relationship when you have an argument, when you have a conflict with someone, you both think you're right and you both think what you're saying is true.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And that's the clash. That's the conflict. Well, I'm right. What I'm saying is true. No, I'm right. What I'm saying is true. That's essentially every conflict, right? And so I would say with every interpersonal conflict, small and large, with every stage of growth along the way, that is the process of going, okay, well, here's what I do is I go in and I say, if I feel uncomfortable with something, like you're having with this experience with this friend.
Sure.
Okay, they were offended, and their offense, or they're offended on behalf of this phantom, person that might get offended or whatever. And their problem now gives you a problem. You feel now uncomfortable.
Absolutely.
And you're grappling with, what do I do about this? And what actually, is he right or am I right? Or what really is the truth here? Because I want to go with what is right and objectively true. What's the right thing to do here? What I notice is, when I feel uncomfortable, I have to take a long pause, and sometimes it's very long, sometimes it's days or weeks, and sit with, am I uncomfortable right now because actually what's happening is some deconstruction of my long-held conditioning, right, that actually needs to come down? Or am I uncomfortable because they are asking me to violate Dharma? And sometimes it's a combination. I'm trying to think if I can come up with it. I have a really kind of simple, silly, kind of funny example from many years ago.
Sure.
I have a more recent example. It's a little bit more triggering, so I'm hesitating to give the more recent one. I'll start with the kind of silly one from about 12 years ago.
Sure.
So I had a yoga student. He was very committed, very sweet, older gentleman, longtime meditator, and he came to my yoga classes twice a week, and he always arrived 20 minutes early. So he was always there before me because I was always late to teach yoga. So I was there early, but he was there earlier. So anyway, I would arrive. He was always in his car. I would unlock the door to my yoga studio, and he would be right behind me. So this was really bothering me. I felt it was annoying me. I felt so annoyed when I saw this man who was really a very sweet man and a very dear, committed yoga student and, you know, just a nice guy. But I was annoyed. And teachers should not, we don't want to feel annoyed at students. That's not an ideal place to be.
That's okay. No, but I mean, what was it that was, go ahead.
That's the question, right? So I sat with this for, I would say, months. I was just witnessing, okay, I'm annoyed, but why am I annoyed about it? Is it because I really want to be able to have the space to myself, doors locked, doors closed, and set the stage and have my bhava, my vibe be attuned to what I'm about to do and the responsibility of teaching, and he's just, you know, impinging on that and interrupting it? Is that what it is? Is it, you know, why is he coming early? Also, like, what is the deal with this? Why is he always early and coming into my system? I sat with it because I recognized what I'm talking about. I recognized this discomfort, which I'm naming as annoyance. It could be anger. It could be competition. We have all different kinds of forms of discomfort. But it was uncomfortable, and I was annoyed. So I witnessed it, and I sat with it, and I watched. And then finally I was like, well, let me just investigate. I don't know why he's doing it, and I don't know why I'm having the reaction I'm having. Is it because he's out of step with Dharma? Or is it because I'm out of step with Dharma? Why should I be annoyed? What do I care if he's here early? Or maybe, so I investigated. So I asked, hey, so-and-so, curious, why do you come so early? And he said, oh, because I want to make sure I get my spot in the room. Okay, so I sat with that for a little bit. And then it was like, okay, that annoyed me. But why does that annoy me? Why should it bother me that he wants his favorite spot in the room? Maybe I'm out of step. I'm trying to control the space and control my student, and I just don't like that he's saving his space. What do I care?
Right.
Am I out of step, or is he out of step? So then I got to further investigate and sit with it. Well, what happened was one day he didn't show up for class. And I had full classes. And so the students were setting up at the beginning of class, and his space remained empty. And he didn't show, and he didn't show, and he didn't show, and his space remained empty. And finally, a new student came in, and they went to go to that space. And a longtime student said, oh, you can't set up there. That's so-and-so's spot. Right? So then I felt this intense sort of, you know, okay, there it is. What's happening here? So now his desire, his preference was actually leaving an imprint, not only on me, but on everyone else in the room and on the space itself. So that then let me know he's a little bit in discord with Dharma. Not intentionally, but there's discord there. And that was why it was bothering me. But I didn't know until I took time to investigate. And in this case, it was actually months. I'm pretty slow, so these things usually take me some time.
Can I ask you? I want to ask you a question though. Really though, you're talking about this was like a full group lesson, right? I mean, and you're the teacher, and you'd like to come in and at least have a sacred space to set up and be able to get into a zone without having anybody there in advance. Is that? And he was always there. Right. Is that right?
Right.
And you somehow thought like that you might be out of step with the Dharma if you actually were like a little bit stern and said, nobody comes in my class before I do, right? I mean, like that, it's my room. Like I would have issue, like I have that at concerts too. Like I'll go to Terrapin Crossroads in San Rafael, and people are like putting blankets on the floor so they can be up in the front row. And then I wind up finding this little square space, and someone's like, "Oh no, that's so-and-so's spot." I'm like, "What are you talking about? They don't own this space, you know?" Like that. So I don't even know really. I mean, I can totally relate to the I just would look at it and say, man, he's just such a goody two shoes. He's pissing me off. Like that's the way I would look at it. But
right. Well, so that was an aspect of my mind, but that's what I had to watch when we're having a reaction. And from the outside, it might seem obvious to someone else, but as someone interested in spiritual growth, we have to look at our own reactions first and not immediately go, they're wrong. Like your friend, like you're doing, you're going, well, should I take this down? Should I keep it up? And you're sitting with that. And your friend actually, if he was committed to spiritual growth, would also be potentially doing the same thing. Well, why doesn't it sit well with me that Jake posted this thing? What about, the simple phrase is, what about this bothers me? Not, you're wrong, change your behavior, I don't like it, change it to make me comfortable. Which I could have done with the student. I could have said, I don't like this. I don't feel comfortable with it. You're wrong. Change it, and then I'll feel comfortable. But that's not the job of someone committed to spiritual growth. We go, why does this make me feel uncomfortable? How interesting is this sensation? Let me investigate in myself why, and then let me witness and watch until it becomes clear how to orient around the situation.
This is fascinating. Kai, we have a game on this program called Name That Voice. I don't think we played this the first time around. I don't expect you to know who this is. It's a little bit of a story, but pay attention. It's a great story, and then we'll come back and reflect on it.
Okay.
But what happened to me, I had a similar experience to Ram Dass. When Maharaji could read his mind and tell his future. I mean, I can't explain this. I'm a scientist, so I can't explain as a scientist what I observed.
Mm-hmm.
I got to the ashram, Kenji, in North India. I got there because my wife had extorted from me, practiced the ancient art of extortion on me, and said, I will leave you unless you come to visit Neem Karoli Baba. And I had to choose between being with my wife, who I've now been married to for 47 years, and again, they say hippie relationships don't last, 47 years, and because I loved her and I didn't want to leave her, or her, more to the point, her to leave me, I went with her to India, and I went to the ashram, and I had read Ram Dass's book, Be Here Now, and I met Ram Dass, and I was intrigued. But my first few days there were terrible. Everybody was bowing down to idols. I hated it.
Right.
It didn't go well with my Judeo-Christian beliefs. I mean, I know what the Ten Commandments say, thou shalt not have before me any other God, and I didn't like this. And then I didn't like the fact that everybody was touching this guy's foot. I mean, bending down and putting their hand on his foot. These were the two things that I didn't like. The third thing I didn't like was that he ignored me. I mean, I did think that I would get to the ashram. I mean, we had to come from San Francisco. I had to pay off all my debts, my medical school debts. Finally got there. I did expect I would go there, and the guru would say, well, welcome, grasshopper. I've been waiting for you. Not only was there no grasshopper and welcome,
right.
Nobody said anything to me. I felt like the odd man out. And they were so nice to my wife. It felt like she was in a cult, and I wasn't very happy. So after about a week of increasingly feeling like this scene was not my scene, I told Girija, my wife, that I was feeling not well, and I took the day off. And I went around the lake, a kind of Himalayan glacial lake that was in the area. And I was trying to find something beautiful to put into my head to dispel my increasingly dark depression, because I realized if that was not for me, I would lose my wife. And so, I would go and I would take a boat out into the middle of this awful lake that was filled with green algae. It was a eutrophic lake. It was a dying lake. The British had thrown all their junk in it, and now the Indians were paying the piper for that. But still, I kept on rowing. I'd go up to the bank, and I would see a little flower. And as if I could have put that flower into my head or into my heart, it would have made me feel better, but I couldn't do that. And I would just go, and I'd look at the temples that were there, and I would try to find some peace. And I would repeat my mafter. I would try to say something, a prayer in Hebrew or Sanskrit or Tibetan or Hindi or English, every kind of like the greatest hits, you know, the Lord's Prayer and Om Mani Padme Hung and Om Ram Shri Ram or Shema Yisrael. You know, I could kind of just rattle them off. I didn't know what they meant, but for the first time in my life, I became so distraught I started to pray. I wasn't even sure how to do that. You send a letter to God, you don't know what the proper salutation is.
Mm-hmm.
And I was trying so hard to be honest and express this terrible feeling I had that I was going to lose my wife. And literally, you know, how do you call the deprogrammers to get her out of a cult? Or if he would give me a small sign that this was the right place for her and for me, I would do anything. And, you know, I looked up in the sky and I said, it doesn't have to be a big rainbow in the sky, Lord. Give me a little tiny rainbow and an oil slick. I'm the only one that needs, you know, or just make me feel something. Or Ramakrishna famously saw two white egrets flying over the sky, which put him into samadhi, into ecstasy. I'll take one. And it can be a dark egret. I don't need anything. Nothing. But I had no sign.
Right.
I was more depressed than ever. And then I came home that night. I said, Georgia, this is not working for me. I'm going to leave. And she said, I know. And we cried and we hugged. And that night was just a terribly hard and tender and loving time together. And the next morning we got up and we packed our little orange backpacks. We divided our meager possessions. And then I got ready to go. And she said, well, you are going to say goodbye to him, aren't you? And I said, you know, I mean, we're from the Midwest. Of course you go to say goodbye. Our parents taught us. So I said, of course, you know, I mean, I don't like this place, but I'm not without manners. So we got a taxi, and it took us down to the ashram, and as luck would have it, we were the first ones there. Of course, I don't believe it was luck. And as luck would have it, we sat down at the tabletop, or it's called a tucket. Little Miss Muffet sat on a tucket. It's a little like a bench that he would sit on. And we waited, and I happened to notice that the villagers had brought flowers and fruit and sweets, and they had arrayed them on his tucket, on his bench, to make the letters of the name of God. And in Sanskrit or Hindi, that name is Ram, one of those names of Ram. And there were apples at the corners of the letters. It was so beautiful. It was called a mandala. So beautiful to have all these fruits and flowers and sweets arrayed to spell the name of God. And whether you believe in God or don't believe in God, like Ram, don't like Ram, have a different God you like, still, it's a treasure when people do that. And they're going to origami. It's such a sweet thing that they had done. And as we kind of sat down and jostled ourselves, one of the apples rolled off the tucket, landed on the ground, and in my monotheistic Jewish way, I noticed that the name of God was incomplete. And they teach you in Hebrew school that the name of God is sacred and it can never be incomplete. The letters cannot be incomplete. So I kind of reflexively reached down to pick up the apple, intending to lift it back up and complete the name of God. And the moment I put my hand down and grabbed the apple, the doors burst open, the Guru Neem Baba leaped out and jumped onto my hand.
No.
And pinned my hand to the ground with his foot.
Oh, my God.
And I was then not only a captive, it felt like he weighed hundreds of pounds. I couldn't, I mean, I was bigger and stronger and younger, but I couldn't extricate my hand.
Wow.
And I was touching his foot, exactly the thing that I had said offended me the most about being in India, is touching a feet. And he's got me pinned down there, and he looked at me, and it looked like he was 100 feet tall, and I looked like an insect. And he didn't say grasshopper, but he could have. He looked down at me and said, you weren't here yesterday. And I had this kind of mixed feeling. I mean, on the one hand, I didn't like my foot touching me, my hand touching me. So on the other, I was glad he missed me, you know.
Right. He acknowledged it for the first time. Right.
You know, I thought like, and then he looked at me and said, where were you? And he began to interrogate me, and all the time laughing. He said, did you go horseback riding? Did you go, snowshoeing? I mean, things that you could never have done. And I'm thinking, he's putting me on. And then he looked at me, and his face just seemed to be filled with love. And his eyes filled with compassion. And he said, were you at the lake? And when he said that, I got a buzz in the back of my spinal cord. And then he said, were you talking to God? And then I got these tingles. And then he said, did you ask for a sign? And that was it. I don't remember what happened next. I went into this state of consciousness that I'm sure was something like my older spiritual brother, so much more advanced than me, who I love and adore, my teacher Ram Dass talked about. When Maharaji made all of the electrical circuits in his brain go so fast, his rational mind couldn't keep up with it. But for me, I had one more rational thought before I slipped into this state of consciousness. For a second, I looked up at him, and it seemed to me as he loved everybody in the world without distinction, every race, every religion, every caste, every gender, everything. He just loved everybody in the world. And I had this one thought, well, that's okay. He should love everybody in the world. He's a guru. And if he were a rabbi or a priest or a minister or an imam, their job description is to love everybody in the world. So he's just doing his job. And then I had this fleeting thought, but in this moment, I love everybody in the world. And I didn't know that this body, this machine, came equipped with the capacity to love everybody in the world. That was my last thought. And then I went and drifted into another state, and he started, playing with my beard, and all the other people in the ashram came around and hugged me, and Girija hugged me, and it gradually, as I came out of this state, I gradually realized that this was my initiation, that there wasn't going to be an initiation in an academic sense with hoods and gowns, and I wasn't going to be given a mystical password, and I didn't have to read a book. This was my initiation. And he looked at me and he said, Dr. America. And I was welcomed in, and that was the name he gave me. I did have a little regret that
Kaya, thank you for sitting through that. I'm not sure, maybe you've run across him in your travels.
I think it's Larry Brilliant's voice, but I'm not sure.
I mean, you nailed it. Are you kidding? Yeah, that was.
Okay.
How did? So, have you hung with him?
No. But I've heard his voice before, and I've been around the Neem Karoli Baba folks.
Okay, so
to some degree, so I know about them, and I know their jam.
Right. I mean, no, definitely.
But I recognize the voice, and yeah.
That was so impressive. That was my interview with him from a couple of years ago, and he told, for a lot of people now, you'll see him on cable news because he's very involved with the pandemic response.
Is he?
Well, I don't know what the remainder of that story, and I don't know if you know this, is that when he called him Dr. America, he gave him the responsibility of eradicating smallpox from India, and he did. I mean, he went out with about 10 other people, and he was in these towns that were just people were ravaged by this thing, and sure enough, Neem Karoli Baba said, this is your mission. You are Dr. America. And that's what he did. But I wanted to, I really thought, just genuinely how beautiful and sort of magical, mystical that story was. And I wanted to ask you about, in your life, not that you had to be in India or that it had to be, the necessarily your husband or something in a relationship, but was there a moment when you had reached a point when you asked for a sign, and it came and it presented itself to you. Is there something in your life that you can hearken back to that is similar? Because I think that if you're on a spiritual path, and I think that, and I think if you follow it with your heart, which is what I've really just been trying to do, then I don't ask for signs hardly. I really don't. But that story instilled in me the understanding that is really the truth with a capital T. And I wanted to know if you could share a similar story in your own life.
Yeah, I love that story. I mean, I've never heard that story before, and I love it. And I love how it kind of speaks to what we were talking about before, the sort of what I would call a lack of reverence for the truth with a capital T in our culture. And I thought that was it was so comical. I was,
you know, it's funny. I didn't even, it just worked out that way, but it's just weird. Yeah. Yeah, totally.
But I'm hearing he's desiring reverence and simultaneously hating it, you know, that they're touching his feet and bowing, and he's like completely turned off by the reverence and simultaneously praying and having reverence and looking for, and he wants to be the chosen one. You know, it's like, that's, you know, it was just,
well,
really,
I mean, let's be clear though. I mean, like, you know, like if you were my girlfriend and I loved you, and you were part of this group, and I wanted to, you know, for him, he was so badly wanting to be accepted authentically so that he could stay with his wife, who he's now been married to for 50 years. So it wasn't just, I mean, there was some personal motive there, you know, I mean, but even so.
What I would say, you know, I would say teachers have a certain kind of karma to have a resonance with a certain kind of student. Right. Teachers, meaning gurus and teachers of all kinds, and same with musicians. You know, there's a certain resonance.
Absolutely.
And so, what I've noticed about the Neem Karoli Baba crew, this is just my own observation.
Dude, I love how you're like that. Do you think that he has his own crew? Like you think?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. But I mean,
look at Jewish intellectual men with addictive personalities. Let's say this, okay?
All right, right on. Let's throw. Yeah, it's perfect.
Okay. For example, that's one category. But what I would even make it even more kind of succinct, and it could, you know, apply to any demographic. I think Neem Karoli Baba had a particular ability to bring light and inspiration and reverence to the hearts of people that suffered with a great deal of over-intellectualized doubt.
Right.
And when you have a lot of doubt, you need magic to overpower the doubt. And so not all gurus do quote-unquote magic. I mean, there's always some degree of magic and serendipity and so on around teachers that are essentially, you know, self-knowing, enlightened, whatever we want to call it. But Neem Karoli Baba is one of those teachers that there's a lot of these kinds of magical, mystical, serendipitous stories. And I think it's because he was designed to be with students who have doubt, and they're constantly, and they're intellectual. And so they need proof.
I think you just, that was about as succinct as you're really in the groove. I mean, that's right there.
So I have definitely had a lot of magical, serendipitous, mystical things happen in my life, in particular regarding, you know, teachers and timing and studying particular subjects and being in right time, right place, that kind of thing. And at the same time, like you, it's been rare in my life that I've asked for, demanded a sign, you know, but at the same time, I do look for signs, and it's kind of something that actually we do in our household, even with the kids on a daily basis, because looking for signs and omens, it's called nimitta in Sanskrit, and nimitta is part of the Vedic tradition, and you can have fun with it, and it also can be taken quite seriously. So we've had, occasions where my husband and I were on a walk and we were talking about the principle of the guru. And in that moment, and we were talking about one of our primary teachers in particular, who was a Nimitta expert and was very magical. And right as we're speaking about him, immediately, and I was just telling my husband, I was just thinking about him on my walk yesterday. And right as I was thinking about him, this eagle flew right over me and landed in front of me. Mm-hmm. And so now I'm telling him this story, and we're talking about the principle of the guru, and we're talking about this teacher in particular. And right then, 4, what are they called? Herons start circling over us and squawking. Wow. And herons are usually alone. They're known as creatures of solitude. You rarely see them, and when you see them, you see one. And this was 4 circling over us. So that kind of thing happens kind of all the time, and because we have some training in Nimitta, when that happens, we go, what is this a sign of? So not necessarily that we go seeking signs, but when something happens, we go, this is out of the ordinary. This is something that is clearly this is
what was the sign that you were thinking about him and he was like, I'm here, and he was connecting with you? What was the sign?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole system of interpreting omens and Nimitta, and it's relatively subjective, right? It's not like you can get the book that says 4 herons equals.
It's all interpretation. I mean, what was your interpretation of it? Yeah.
So at the moment, what we interpreted was indeed a connection with this particular teacher who we've been connecting with more. He's left the body, but we had both a little bit before started doing this mantra practice, which was connecting us to him. The mantra practice to a particular deity that he had a connection to, and we didn't know going into it the extent of it. But as we were both doing this daily practice separately, but a similar practice, we were both having a lot of magic regarding thoughts of that teacher. So in that case, it wasn't like a sign of something to come necessarily. It felt more like confirmation. Yes, you're deepening this connection and this relationship. But I do have another story if you want to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
This was related to our studying Vedic astrology. So this is about, this is 2005. We went to India. We were hoping to study Ayurveda. We befriended this lovely man who owns a jewel shop, Jaipur Gems in Rishikesh. It's still there, and he's a lovely man. And we were hanging out with this man on a regular basis. And one day we went into the shop and we said, we really want to study Ayurveda. We had zero interest in studying Vedic astrology, never crossed our minds. And he said, this is the kind of thing that happens in India all the time. Things just happen if you're open to them. So he said, no, you're not going to study Ayurveda. You're going to study Vedic astrology.
Wow, he told you.
And he handed us this man's number. And we were like, well, okay, we got to do something. So we called the man. We went. The man owned a bookshop. His name is Colonel Puri. And we went to Colonel Puri's bookshop, and we said, okay, well, we were told to see you and study Vedic astrology with you, Jyotisha. And he said, okay. And he went to in his bookshop, this little shack, and he pulls this book off the shelf. He says, you're going to read this book for starters, and then you're going to come to my house every day, which we went on to do. So we take this book. It's written by Hart Defoe. We'd never heard of him before. I had one Vedic astrology reading before this, maybe 2. It was not anyway. So we start the book. We come to find, and then we study with this man for 1 full month every day in Rishikesh, and then we change our entire lives because of it. We get back to California, and we say, we want to find this man who wrote the book. He's in California. We relocate to live near where he was living and teaching, and my husband immediately dove in deep to studying with him and went on to study with him closely for a number of years. We came to find out later that while we were taking that book off the bookshelf in Rishikesh, that teacher, Hart, who wrote the book, was in Rishikesh at the same time with a group of students teaching them Vedic astrology. At the same time that we were going to this Indian man's house every day, wow. The man that we would go on to study with was right there as well, teaching Vedic astrology.
And the guy in the store had no idea that dude was there.
Well, we later found out that he actually went to a talk with Hart. Because Hart Despo, he's known, my husband's teacher, and who I studied with as well, he is known even in India as the astrologer to the astrologers.
Wow.
Among Jyotishis, he is like the guy. So while we were on an evening when we were, we had been studying with this man every morning, Colonel Puri went and listened to a talk by Hart. We didn't know that. It was like it all kind of, we found out about it later. So it was like the signs were all happening, but we were just saying yes to things, but we weren't even necessarily, we weren't like, oh, that book was a sign to study with this man. It was like, oh, well, we like the book and he's the dude. So and we didn't know he was there. And then it was only about 2 years ago that I remembered that before all of that happened in India, I had a Vedic astrology reading. And the man said to me, looking at my chart, he said, oh, and your husband is one day going to do what I do. I had completely discarded that statement. I was like, this is about me. Who cares? I completely forgot. And for some reason, a year or two ago, that memory flooded back into my mind. Oh my gosh, so many years ago, I was told that you were going to do what you're now doing. And I discarded it, didn't remember, but it was like, in other words, the signs are there all the time. We just don't necessarily know that something is a sign because we're caught up in other
Well,
things.
I think also like what you're saying is if it feels right on the path, go ahead and then you'll find out later why you were doing it. I mean, you're not going to have the keys and it's not going to guide you directly with all these little landmarks. It's going to all make sense later on after you've followed your heart. I think that is,
That's right.
Kayama, I'm backed up against. I have 3 interviews today. I barely got to anything I really wanted to talk to you about. Maybe we can do set 3 in like a month when you feel like you are ready to communicate again.
Sure.
Yeah. I thank you so much for helping me through this little drama I'm dealing with, and maybe I can talk to you a little bit more about it offline because I feel like my reaction is also will create dharma, good or bad, and I'm kind of like trying to figure out how to craft something that is that I have self-respect for, but also is not over the top,
Totally. Well, I'll end with this advice that's from my first guru, my mother.
Yes.
And she would say, when you don't know what to do, do nothing. And that's reflected in the Bhagavad Gita as well, it turns out. So
I dig that. I know, and that's what I'm doing right now. But you really, it's always good to hear your voice, and many blessings to you and your family.
Thank you. Such a pleasure. Same to you. We'll talk again.
Do it again. Yeah. Later. Bye.
We will.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Such an honor to talk to such a wise soul, Kai Midland, and we'll be back with Hadley Hawkinsmith